In-laws banned me from their home on my daughter's birthday. I still remember the first time I set foot in my wife's parents' house. It was a pristine suburban home that radiated a kind of wealth and pride. Her family, mostly affluent and deeply rooted in what felt like a different world, seemed polite, even welcoming at first, but there were always moments when I'd catch the slightest flicker of discomfort from her mother or the casual jokes that crossed the line from friendly to something else. As a son of immigrants, and as an Asian man, I was accustomed to not quite fitting in, yet I brushed those moments off, focusing on my relationship with Emma. Emma and I met in college, and despite our different backgrounds, we connected easily. Her warmth and sense of humor made every day brighter. And after 5 years together, we had a beautiful little girl who filled our lives with more joy than I ever thought possible. When we married, we fell into a routine of holiday visits and family get-togethers, where I'd join her relatives with a quiet acceptance that there would always be an unspoken barrier between us. Emma knew the complexities of my experience, and while she didn't fully understand it, she tried her best to support me. Since our daughter was born, it's become tradition to celebrate her birthday at her grandparents' house. They have a large backyard with a pool, perfect for hosting a crowd. And for the past few years, it's been a day my daughter looked forward to. This year, we decided to do the same, except with one important addition: my parents flew in for the summer, eager to celebrate with us. It was their first time visiting since the pandemic, and I couldn't wait to share this part of our life with them. It felt like a rare opportunity to blend my world with Emma's. To have everyone come together to celebrate our daughter. The morning of her 5th birthday was busy, with Emma's mom bustling around the kitchen, setting out trays of food while my mom quietly helped in the background. The backyard looked festive, with colorful balloons tied to the fence and a stack of towels set out by the pool. Kids darted in and out of the house, laughing and carrying small plates of snacks. And my daughter, wearing her new swimsuit and a big smile, was already in the pool with a few friends. As I watched her play, I felt a swell of pride. She was growing up so fast, each year bringing new milestones. She loved the pool, loved the feeling of flying through the water. And today, more than anything, she wanted me to toss her like I always did. My daughter has a love for swimming that, I'm convinced, she inherited from me. I'd grown up near the coast, and my parents, who had little but managed to bring us to the water every summer, encouraged my love for the ocean. So, when she asked, I didn't hesitate. I climbed into the pool, greeted with a chorus of laughter and splashing. With a gentle toss, I sent her into the air, her delighted squeals filling the yard. Soon, her friends were lined up, asking for their turn, and I gently tossed each one, keeping a careful eye to make sure everyone was safe. My daughter's cousin joined in, and with each toss, the laughter grew, a joyful chaos filling the pool area. The backyard was alive with the sounds of kids laughing and splashing. And for a moment, I felt at ease. But then, in an instant, that ease was shattered. From the side of the pool, her step-grandfather's voice boomed over the laughter, cutting through the air. I've had enough of this. Do you hear me now? His voice was filled with anger. And I looked up, momentarily frozen, trying to make sense of the sudden change in tone. My daughter clung to my arm, confused. As I turned to face him, I didn't hear anything, I managed to say, still processing his outburst. His face was red, and I could tell he was furious, though I had no idea why. Before I could respond, my wife's mother stepped in, arms crossed, her face stern. You never listen to the rules, she said, her tone sharp. I felt a wave of confusion and humiliation wash over me. Rules? I'd been careful, keeping the kids safe, making sure they were having fun. It didn't make sense. Another mother, one of our family friends, leaned over and whispered, I didn't see anything wrong. I thought you were just playing with the kids. But her words offered little comfort. The step-grandfather and grandmother's disapproval hung in the air, an accusation that seemed to reach deeper than just the pool. Standing there, dripping wet and bewildered, I felt the weight of something I couldn't quite put into words. As the other kids went back to playing, I found myself still reeling, a growing sense of unease gnawing at me. Later, when the party began winding down, I tried to approach the grandmother to clear the air. I explained that I hadn't heard anything over the splashing and laughter, hoping to bring a sense of reason back to the conversation. But she cut me off, her eyes cold. Don't lie to me, she said. as if my explanation was a personal affront. "I know exactly what you were doing," I stammered, taken aback, feeling the confusion turn into frustration. I tried to explain that I hadn't intended any disrespect, that I'd only wanted my daughter and her friends to enjoy themselves safely. But she wasn't listening. Instead, she took my attempt to clarify as an insult. And things escalated quickly. "You're calling me crazy now?" she spat, her voice icy. And just like that, she declared I was banned from their house. In that moment, I felt a rush of emotions: anger, humiliation, disbelief. I had done nothing but try to make my daughter's birthday special. Yet somehow, I was being cast out, marked as an outsider in a family I had tried so hard to integrate into. I glanced around, hoping to catch Emma's eye, but she was busy with the kids, unaware of the intensity of the confrontation. It was then I decided, standing there by the pool, feeling more isolated than ever, that I couldn't keep subjecting myself to these unspoken expectations and rules that no one had ever bothered to explain. As I helped my daughter dry off, I realized I was done trying to fit in where I wasn't welcome. The sun glinted off the water as I settled into the pool, my daughter's hand still clutching mine, her little face beaming with excitement. "Daddy, throw me higher," she squealed, her eyes wide with that pure, untamed joy only a 5-year-old can show. "All right, birthday girl, here we go," I said, bracing myself in the water. She let go of my hand, held her breath, and positioned herself for the toss. I gave her a gentle throw, and she arced through the air before splashing down, resurfacing with an ear-to-ear grin. Her laughter was infectious, echoing across the backyard, and soon, other children gathered around, drawn to our corner of the pool. Me next, her friend chimed in, a look of sheer anticipation on her face. She was ready before I even had a chance to offer. I gave her a lighter toss, careful to ensure it was just enough to make her laugh without startling her. One by one, the kids lined up, each eagerly awaiting their turn. With each toss, there was more laughter, more splashing, the sound blending into a symphony of happiness. Somewhere behind me, I heard adults chatting, and I knew my wife was probably in the shade with her mom, likely updating her on our daughter's school adventures. I figured the step-grandfather was inside, as I hadn't seen him since we arrived. But the pool felt like our own world, and I was completely focused on these kids, their wide eyes and laughter. Each time I gently tossed one of them, they seemed happier than before, and seeing that joy was all I could focus on. Then, my daughter's cousin, one of her closest playmates, joined in, giving me a tentative look. "Can you throw me too?" she asked, eyes hopeful. "Of course," I assured her, lifting her slightly before giving her a quick, gentle toss into the water. She shrieked with laughter, and soon enough, she was back for a second go, along with the other kids. We continued in a playful rotation, me careful to make sure each toss was light and safe. I kept a steady rhythm, reminding them of the one at a time rule to keep things orderly. The kids were in a single line, waiting their turn, each toss met with smiles and laughter. For a moment, I glanced toward the adults sitting by the side of the pool, briefly catching sight of the step-grandfather standing in the distance, his arms folded as he watched. I thought nothing of it, assuming he was simply observing. Still, there was a faint glint in his eye, a look that didn't quite match the warmth of the day. But I was too wrapped up in the kids' laughter to give it a second thought. A gentle splash from behind alerted me to a mother who'd come over, her eyes sparkling as she watched her own child's turn. "They're having a blast," she said, smiling. "It's so nice to see them all playing together." I nodded, feeling a sense of satisfaction that I'd made my daughter's day special. "Yeah, it's the least I can do. Birthdays are important, right?" She chuckled and nodded before returning to her seat, leaving me to continue the rotation with the kids. But even as I returned to play, I couldn't shake the subtle shift in the air. Glancing back, I noticed my wife's mother, standing a bit closer now, her face tense and watchful. Something about her gaze made me feel exposed, like I was on trial for simply playing with the kids. I kept my focus on my daughter, pushing aside the unease gnawing at the back of my mind. Yet, the looks continued, each one carrying an unspoken weight. My daughter's joy was palpable, her laughter unrestrained, but somehow, it felt like that happiness was unwelcome in the eyes of some. "All right, last round," I called out cheerfully, giving my daughter one final toss. sending her into a splash that made the whole pool ripple. The kids cheered, clapping, still wanting more, but I motioned for them to settle down, guiding them to the steps at the shallow end. Some of them began splashing each other, already absorbed in another game, while others wandered off toward their parents, content and smiling. That's when it happened. The step-grandfather's voice suddenly boomed from the edge of the pool, slicing through the happy chatter like a knife. "I've had enough of this. Do you hear me now?" The volume of his voice startled the kids, who all turned to look, some holding onto the pool's edge, their eyes wide and uncertain. My heart pounded as I looked up at him, momentarily frozen. The words stung, each one soaked in an anger I hadn't expected. I stood there, unsure how to respond. "I didn't hear anything but the kids laughing," I managed to say, my voice cautious, careful. I didn't want to escalate things. Not in front of the children or my own parents. But his glare didn't soften. Before I could say anything more, my wife's mother joined him, her arms crossed and a disapproving look plastered across her face. "You never listen to the rules," she said, each word precise and cold. "There are rules for a reason." My mouth went dry, and a flicker of confusion crossed my face. Rules? I'd been playing carefully, supervising each toss, keeping the kids safe. The entire time, they'd been laughing, enjoying themselves without issue. But here I was, being scolded, treated as if I'd done something fundamentally wrong. A silence fell over the backyard, the once lively pool area now tense and uncomfortable. I glanced around, catching sight of the mother who just complimented me. She gave me a sympathetic look, as if to say she understood I hadn't done anything out of line. "I didn't see anything wrong," she whispered softly, as if her voice could undo the harshness of the accusation. But the words were already out there, lingering, shaping everyone's perception. In that moment, standing there in front of my daughter's grandparents, I felt a rush of shame and frustration I hadn't expected. I'd done nothing but try to make my daughter's birthday special. Yet somehow, I was the villain in their eyes. The step-grandfather's glare was unwavering. The grandmother's disappointment etched into her features, as if my presence had tainted the day. My daughter tugged at my arm, her face mirroring my own confusion, and I knelt down beside her, forcing a smile. "It's all right, sweetheart," I murmured, trying to reassure her, even as my heart ached with the weight of the unspoken accusations. I took a few deep breaths, trying to regain my composure as the kids gradually dispersed, and the sounds of laughter faded into silence. The festive energy of the party felt muted, replaced by a tension I couldn't shake. Even the sun, once warm and welcoming, seemed to dim, casting shadows across the yard. As the other parents guided their kids inside, and my daughter joined her friends in drying off, I felt the sting of an unspoken barrier, one I hadn't realized was still there, dividing me from my wife's family. No amount of joyful play or shared memories could bridge it. I stood there, alone, in the very place where I should have felt welcome. As the last echoes of laughter faded from the backyard, I stood by the edge of the pool, feeling the weight of the step-grandfather's words still hanging in the air. It wasn't just the shock of his sudden outburst, it was the sting of the accusation. I'd done nothing but play with my daughter and her friends, making sure they were safe, bringing a little joy to her birthday. But in that moment, he looked at me as though I'd broken some unspoken rule, something that no one had bothered to explain. I glanced at my wife's mother, hoping for some clarity, but her expression only mirrored the anger in her husband's voice. Her arms crossed tightly, her mouth set in a thin line. The usual warmth and tolerance I'd forced myself to assume was gone, replaced by a hardness that left me feeling exposed. The other guests started to drift back inside, casting a few uncertain glances our way, as though they'd walked in on something private, something uncomfortable. One of the other mothers who'd been watching leaned in, whispering softly, "I don't think you did anything wrong." Her voice was gentle, a tiny thread of validation that I clung to. But it was too little, too late. As the backyard cleared out, I took a deep breath, willing myself to stay calm. I caught sight of Emma, who was busy helping our daughter out of the pool. She hadn't seen the full exchange and was still blissfully unaware of the tension simmering between me and her parents. Once the last of the guests had moved inside, I walked over to my wife's mother. The step-grandfather had already disappeared, likely pacing somewhere inside, nursing his anger. I tried to keep my tone level, respectful, even as frustration churned in my chest. I didn't hear anything but the kids laughing and playing. I began, hoping she'd understand that I hadn't ignored anything on purpose, that I hadn't meant any disrespect. But instead of softening, she looked at me with an expression of cold disbelief. "Don't lie to me," she snapped, her words laced with accusation. "You heard him. You just chose to ignore him. Like you always do." I felt a surge of indignation, followed quickly by confusion. Ignore him? The man had barely spoken 2 words to me since we'd arrived. And I'd done nothing but focus on making sure the kids were safe and happy. "I didn't mean to ignore anyone," I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "I was just playing with the kids. And everyone was having a good time. I really didn't hear anything over the laughter." But she didn't seem to care. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw set. "You think you're above our rules, don't you?" she said, her tone heavy with disdain. "This is exactly why we have rules, to keep things under control. You come in here and act like you know better. As if our way of doing things doesn't matter to you." The accusation hit me like a slap. And for a moment, I struggled to find the right words. I wasn't here to disrespect anyone or ignore anyone's rules. I was here for my daughter's birthday. To make her feel special and loved. But every attempt I made to explain myself was met with a wall of resistance. As though I'd already been tried and found guilty. This is crazy," I muttered, the words slipping out before I could stop myself. I wasn't accusing her of anything. But the frustration in my voice was unmistakable. I hadn't come here to argue. Yet here I was, feeling as though I was being reprimanded like a child for something I hadn't even known was wrong. Her expression darkened, and I realized too late that my choice of words had only made things worse. "You're calling me crazy now?" she spat, her voice icy and sharp. It was as though I'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. And I felt the chasm between us widen. "No, I'm not calling you crazy." I tried to backpedal, my voice calmer but tinged with desperation. I just don't understand. I was trying to make the kids happy. To make sure everyone was safe. I didn't mean any disrespect. I'd hoped my sincerity would soften her. That maybe she'd understand where I was coming from. But instead, she simply stared at me. Her face unmoved, her eyes hard. "You're banned from this house," she said finally, her tone final, as if she were issuing a royal decree. "You're not welcome here anymore." Her words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. I felt the finality of it settle over me. A cold, sinking feeling that left me momentarily speechless. In a matter of minutes, I'd gone from celebrating my daughter's birthday to being exiled, treated as though I were an intruder in a place I'd once tried to make a home. The backyard that had once felt like a space for laughter and family now felt hostile. Foreign, a place where I no longer belonged. I could feel the stares of a few remaining guests from inside. And I knew that word of what had happened would spread. My presence here would be remembered not as a father making his daughter's birthday special, but as a man who had somehow disrespected the family, defied their unspoken rules. I turned, catching sight of my daughter as she tugged on Emma's hand, her face glowing with the lingering joy of the day. She had no idea what had just happened, and I realized that, for her sake, I'd have to keep this to myself. At least for now. She didn't need to carry the weight of this moment. The knowledge that her father had been cast out by the very people who should have been part of her happiest days. As I gathered my things, my mind raced, a mix of disbelief and anger swirling within me. This wasn't about pool rules or noise, it was something deeper. Something I'd felt for years but had tried to ignore. The way they'd looked at me. The harshness of their words. The ease with which they dismissed me. It wasn't just about today. It was a culmination of years of barely concealed prejudice, of treating me like an outsider. No matter how much I tried to be part of their family. In that moment, I made a silent vow. I would no longer subject myself to their unspoken rules. To the constant feeling of walking on eggshells in a place where I'd never truly belong. I would continue to be there for my daughter. To be the father she needed. But I would no longer seek approval from those who had made it clear that I would never be welcome. As I left the backyard, I cast one final glance at Emma's mother. Her gaze still hard and unyielding. I realized then that no words, no explanations, would ever change her perception of me. And with that, I turned away, leaving behind the place where I'd once hoped to find family but had instead found rejection. As I drove home that night, the house now behind me, my mind was a storm of emotions I could barely keep in check. Anger, disbelief, and a deep sense of humiliation churned together, each one feeding the next. Emma sat silently beside me, sensing the tension, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder in a gentle attempt at comfort. My daughter, tucked in her car seat, was already dozing off, blissfully unaware of the fracture that had formed within our family on her birthday. Once we got home, Emma and I put our daughter to bed, moving through the familiar bedtime routine with quiet efficiency. But beneath my calm exterior, my mind was still replaying the events of the day, each moment tinged with a growing sense of clarity. It wasn't just about today, it was a culmination of moments. A series of small but unmistakable slights I had experienced since the beginning. Today's confrontation had simply ripped the polite veil off the truth I'd always sensed but tried to ignore. Sitting at the edge of the bed that night, I thought back to other gatherings. Other seemingly innocent moments when I'd felt the same discomfort, the subtle glances. The way my in-laws' jokes veered dangerously close to stereotypes. The way certain topics were quickly brushed off if they veered too close to my background or my family. I'd let it slide because I wanted so badly to believe that, despite our differences, they would come to accept me as part of the family. But no matter how many gatherings I attended or how many polite conversations I forced myself through, it was clear I would always be an outsider. There was one memory in particular that hit hard as I sat there, reflecting. A few years ago, during the Thanksgiving dinner, Emma's brother-in-law, the one I'd privately labeled as a drunk doofus, had been joking around with his kids, tossing them around in the living room as they giggled and squealed. I'd been sitting nearby with my daughter, then barely a toddler, and as I reached out to her, he'd slurred something that still echoed in my mind, "Careful. Don't let her turn out too mixed up." Huh? It had taken me a second to process his words, to register that the offhand remark wasn't just about my daughter's energetic playfulness, but about her heritage, a half-breed. He'd called her at another family event, laughing as if it were a harmless joke. While I stood there, too stunned to respond, that word, so casually tossed out, had stung more than I'd ever let on. I'd brushed it off, choosing to focus on my daughter's happy face, telling myself that he didn't really mean it, that it was just drunken talk. But now, sitting here, I felt the weight of those words again, the ugly reminder that, to them, she was different in a way that marked her, that set her apart in ways that weren't innocent. The double standard became clearer with every memory that surfaced. My brother-in-law could drop his daughter's head on the concrete, and no one batted an eye. He could pull my daughter underwater, laughing as she struggled to resurface, and they would see it as playful, excusing it as harmless fun. Yet here I was, condemned for tossing my own daughter gently into the pool, treated like a threat for doing what I knew was safe and controlled. And then there was the step-grandfather. His silent disapproval had always been there, lurking beneath his polite facade. I'd noticed the way he watched me, as though assessing whether I was worthy of being in his home. Every conversation with him felt like a test, each question subtly probing, digging for something he could find fault with. He never asked about my family, my background, or my work in a way that felt genuine. It was always polite but shallow, a veneer of civility that barely masked his judgment. I told myself it didn't matter, that his opinions were his own. But today's outburst had brought it all to the surface. Even Emma's mother, who I'd once believed might actually accept me, had shown her true colors today. Her reaction hadn't been one of simple misunderstanding, it was a deliberate choice to assume the worst, to paint me as someone who defied their family's values. In her mind, I hadn't just broken an unspoken rule, I dared to step outside the invisible boundaries they'd set for me. And when I tried to defend myself, she saw it as an insult, a challenge to her authority, something she couldn't tolerate. As the memories piled up, I felt a deep sense of betrayal. I'd spent years accommodating their expectations, bending over backward to make myself seem less foreign, less different, even if it meant hiding parts of myself. I'd attended every family gathering, laughed politely at jokes I didn't find funny, brushed off the subtle digs at my heritage, all in the hope that one day, they'd see me as family, that they'd accept my daughter and me as we were. But it was clear now that nothing I did would ever change their perception. To them, I was an outsider who had somehow infiltrated their lives, and no amount of politeness or accommodation would alter that. More than anything, though, I worried for my daughter. I tried to shield her from these moments, to keep her from noticing the subtle ways they treated her differently. But she was growing up. And soon, she'd start picking up on the cues. The glances. The casual remarks that hinted at her difference. Today had been her birthday. A day meant to celebrate her life. Her joy. Her unique light. But it had ended in judgment. In accusations. In a reminder that, to some, she would always be seen as not quite enough. I couldn't let her grow up believing that she had to shrink herself. That she had to fit into their narrow view of what family meant. She deserved better than that. She deserved to know that her heritage was something to be proud of. Something to celebrate, not something to be hidden or diminished to make others comfortable. As Emma sat beside me, listening quietly as I shared my feelings, I could see the pain in her eyes. The conflict between loyalty to her family and the growing awareness of how they'd hurt me. She tried to reassure me, saying that her parents and stepfather didn't mean it the way it seemed. That they just had their own ways. But I couldn't accept that anymore. I couldn't keep excusing behavior that left me feeling smaller. Behavior that made my daughter question her place in her own family. That night, I made a decision. I would no longer let their unspoken rules and judgments dictate my actions. I would set boundaries to protect myself. But more importantly, to protect my daughter. If they couldn't accept us as we were, then I wouldn't force myself, or her, into their mold. No more letting things slide. No more pretending that the discomfort was all in my head. It was time to acknowledge the truth and take a stand. And in doing so, I'd show my daughter that she deserved respect. That she had the right to be proud of who she was. That her family didn't have to mean compromising her dignity. In the quiet of that night, I felt a strange sense of relief settle over me. I knew there would be consequences. That there would be backlash and hurt feelings. But I also knew that, for the first time, I was choosing to stand up for myself. To set boundaries that would protect my daughter's happiness and self-worth. It was a painful step, but a necessary one, and as I held Emma's hand, I felt the strength to move forward. The next morning, I woke up early, my thoughts from the previous night still fresh, solidified in the clarity of daylight. I knew I had to have a conversation with Emma about setting boundaries with her family. It was uncomfortable, but I was more sure than ever that if I didn't address it now, things would only continue to fester beneath the surface. I couldn't let that happen, not for myself and certainly not for our daughter. I made coffee and waited for Emma to come downstairs, the air thick with the weight of what I was about to say. As she stepped into the kitchen, still in her pajamas, she gave me a tired but warm smile. But it faded as soon as she noticed the serious look on my face. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her eyes filled with concern. I took a deep breath, bracing myself. "Emma, I need to talk to you about what happened yesterday, about your family." She glanced down, her hands twisting together nervously. "I know things got intense," she said softly. "My parents can be set in their ways. I'm really sorry you had to go through that." I nodded, grateful for her acknowledgement, but I could feel a slight pang of frustration that she was still framing it as though it were just a minor misunderstanding. "Emma, this isn't just about yesterday," I began, my voice steady but firm. "It's about a pattern that's been there for years. The subtle jabs, the double standards, the way they treat me and our daughter like we're different. Not quite family." She looked up, a flicker of pain crossing her face. But she didn't interrupt. "I've tried so hard to fit in," I continued, my voice thick with emotion. "To ignore it, to brush it off, to be patient. But yesterday, they crossed a line. I was there to make our daughter's birthday special. And they turned it into an attack, treated me like an outsider who doesn't know the rules. I can't keep putting myself in that position, Emma, and I won't let our daughter be subjected to it either." Emma swallowed, her gaze darting away as she processed my words. She was quiet for a moment, and I could see the struggle on her face. The internal conflict between her loyalty to me and her loyalty to her parents. "I know my family isn't perfect," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "They have their old-fashioned ways. But they love our daughter. They don't mean to make you feel this way. But they do," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. I softened my voice, wanting her to understand the depth of my frustration and pain. "Emma, they see her as different. And that makes her feel different. And me? They treat me as though I'll never truly be part of the family. I can't ignore it anymore. I need you to see this from my perspective. If this continues, it's going to affect our daughter. It already is." She bit her lip, clearly struggling. I don't want to cause a rift in the family. You know how they are. How they see family as everything. But," she trailed off, looking down at her hands, twisting them anxiously. "Emma," I said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I know it's hard to challenge them. But if we keep going along with things as they are, we're teaching our daughter to accept disrespect, to accept that part of her identity isn't welcome in her own family. Is that really what we want?" She closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek. "No, of course not. I want her to feel loved and accepted. Just like you do. But I don't know if my parents will change. They're set in their ways. And I don't want to make things worse." I squeezed her hand gently. "Emma, I'm not asking you to make them change. I'm asking you to set boundaries. To stand by me, by our daughter. And make it clear that if they can't accept us as we are, then we can't keep putting ourselves in situations where we're treated like we're less." She looked at me, her expression filled with conflict but also a hint of determination. "What kind of boundaries?" she asked, her voice tentative but curious. I took a deep breath, relieved that she was willing to consider it. "I think we need to limit how much time we spend with them. Family gatherings should be about joy and connection, not judgment and discomfort. If they can't treat us with respect, then we don't have to keep subjecting ourselves to their presence. And, if they can't treat our daughter the way she deserves, then maybe we need to consider keeping her away from that negativity." Emma nodded slowly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "That makes sense. But it feels so final. Like we're closing a door on them." I reached out, taking both her hands in mine, my gaze steady. "We're not closing a door, Emma. We're just setting boundaries, protecting our family. If they're willing to meet us halfway, to respect those boundaries, then we'll still be here. But they need to understand that our daughter's well-being, and ours, comes first." She wiped her tears, her face resolute. "You're right. I can't keep making excuses for them. And I can't keep asking you to put up with their treatment. I'll talk to them. I'll tell them that things have to change. Or, we'll have to reconsider what role they play in our lives." Relief flooded through me. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It wouldn't be easy. Confronting her family would likely bring its own set of challenges and tensions. But knowing that Emma was willing to stand by me, to prioritize our family's happiness and security, gave me the strength to move forward. We sat in silence for a moment, her head resting on my shoulder as we absorbed the gravity of what lay ahead. But even in the quiet, I felt a newfound sense of hope. We were taking a stand, not just for ourselves, but for our daughter, to show her that she deserved to be loved and respected unconditionally. That her identity was something to be cherished, not hidden. As the morning sunlight streamed through the window, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. A determination to protect the family we'd built together. Whatever came next, I knew we were facing it as a united front, committed to creating a home where love, acceptance, and respect reigned. Emma and I agreed to have the conversation with her parents the following weekend. As the day approached, I felt a mixture of dread and determination, knowing this wasn't going to be easy. But I also knew it was necessary. I kept reminding myself that this was for our daughter's well-being as much as mine. That we were doing what was right for our family. Even if her parents couldn't understand. The morning of the meeting, I could see Emma's anxiety in the way she kept glancing at the clock, her fingers tapping nervously against the kitchen counter. I took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We're in this together, remember? No matter how they react, we're doing this for us." She gave me a shaky smile. "I know, I don't want to hurt them. But I can't let them keep hurting you and our daughter either." It wasn't long before we arrived at her parents' house. The familiar sight of their well-manicured lawn and stately front porch bringing back a flood of memories, some good, but others tinged with the discomfort I'd been feeling for years. We knocked on the door, and her mother answered with a warm smile, though it faded slightly when she saw my serious expression. "Come on in," she said, gesturing us inside. "Is everything all right?" I could feel the weight of the conversation pressing down on me. But I held onto Emma's hand, drawing strength from her presence. Her parents led us into the living room, where we sat across from them, the air thick with anticipation. Emma took a deep breath, breaking the silence. "Mom, Dad, we need to talk. There's something important that we both feel needs to be addressed." Her voice was calm but laced with a tension that made her words feel heavier. Her mother's brow furrowed, concern flickering across her face. "What is it, honey?" Is everything okay? I decided to speak up. My voice steady though my heart was pounding. Over the years, I've noticed a pattern in how I've been treated by the family. There have been many small instances. Subtle moments that, individually, might seem like misunderstandings, but together, they've made me feel unwelcome. Her father's face tightened slightly, his mouth setting in a firm line, but he stayed silent. Emma's mother, however, looked genuinely surprised. Unwelcome? We never meant for you to feel that way, she said, her tone softening. We've always thought of you as part of the family. I appreciate that, I replied, trying to keep my tone respectful. But there have been instances where I felt singled out, judged for my background, for being different. I've brushed it off for years, hoping things would change. But yesterday, on our daughter's birthday, it reached a point where I can't ignore it anymore. Emma squeezed my hand, her gaze fixed on her parents. And it's not just about him. Our daughter feels it too. Even if she doesn't fully understand it yet. I don't want her growing up feeling like she has to hide who she is. Like she has to change to be accepted by her own family. Her father finally spoke, his voice tinged with irritation. Are you saying we've been racist? His words were blunt, and I could feel the room's tension spike. His eyes narrowing as he looked between the two of us. Emma's hand trembled slightly in mine, but she held firm. No, Dad, we're not accusing you of anything that direct. But there have been moments, comments, attitudes that have made us feel uncomfortable. It may not be intentional, but it's still there, and it's affecting us, especially our daughter. Her mother's face fell, a mix of confusion and hurt flashing across her features. I don't understand. We've always treated her like one of the family. I bought her presents, spent time with her, included her in everything. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. It's not just about inclusion. It's about respect and acceptance, about seeing us, both of us, as equals in this family, without needing us to change or fit into some mold. I want my daughter to grow up knowing she's loved for who she is. Not in spite of it. Emma's father looked away, his jaw clenched, clearly struggling with the conversation. Her mother glanced between us, trying to process everything, before finally speaking again. So, what do you want us to do? It was a simple question, but one I'd been afraid they'd ask. Because the answer wasn't easy. We want boundaries, I said, my voice steady. We want to limit the amount of time we spend together, especially in situations where things could become uncomfortable or hurtful. We need to create a safe space for our daughter, where she doesn't have to worry about judgment or feeling different. Her father looked like he wanted to argue, his mouth opening to protest. But Emma spoke up before he could, her voice filled with quiet determination. This isn't negotiable, Dad. We're not saying you've done this intentionally. But we can't ignore the impact it's having. If we're going to maintain a healthy relationship with you, it has to be one that respects our boundaries. There was a silence that stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Her father's face hard and unyielding, while her mother's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Finally, her mother spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. We never wanted to make you feel unwelcome. I'm so sorry if we did. But, I just wish you'd told us sooner. I nodded, a wave of relief and gratitude washing over me at her words. I know, and I'm sorry we didn't speak up sooner. But we're telling you now. And we're asking for your understanding. We want to continue being part of the family. But it has to be on terms that protect our family's happiness and dignity. Her father's face softened just slightly, a flicker of understanding crossing his features. He didn't look entirely convinced, but he gave a reluctant nod. If this is what you need, then we'll respect that. But I hope, in time, we can work things out. That you'll feel truly at home here. Emma nodded, her voice laced with emotion. That's all we're asking for, Dad, just a chance to feel accepted without conditions. The conversation left me emotionally drained but relieved, a weight lifting from my shoulders. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a step in the right direction, a promise that things might someday be different. As Emma and I drove home, hand in hand, I felt a sense of peace settle over me, knowing we'd taken a stand, together, for our family's future. After that difficult conversation with Emma's parents, I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. We'd set the boundaries, made our position clear, but I knew enforcing them would be the real challenge. The next family event on the calendar was Emma's niece's birthday. And while we wanted to support her niece, we both agreed to take the day as a chance to put our boundaries into practice. When the day came, I felt a knot of tension in my stomach as we prepared to head over. I could see the anxiety on Emma's face, too, and I reached for her hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Remember, we're doing this for us and for our daughter," I said gently. "We're a team, and we don't have to stay if things go sideways." She nodded, taking a deep breath. "You're right, and I know we're doing the right thing. It's just, I wish this didn't have to be so hard." We arrived at her parents' house, and from the moment we walked in, I felt the weight of everyone's eyes. Her parents greeted us politely but stiffly, and her father's handshake was quick, his eyes darting away before I could read his expression. But Emma's mother seemed softer, more hesitant, and she greeted us with a strained but genuine smile. "I'm glad you came," she said softly, her gaze flicking to our daughter as she offered her a warm hug. "It's nice to see you all." The tension lingered, but it felt like an olive branch, a small effort toward bridging the gap we'd laid bare during that conversation. I felt a spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, things could change with time. We made our way to the backyard, where the other kids were already playing. Our daughter joined in eagerly, laughing and running around with her cousins, blissfully unaware of the undercurrents around her. Emma and I stayed close by, casually observing while also keeping our distance from her parents. As we'd agreed, we interacted warmly with her other relatives, but we didn't force ourselves into every conversation or linger in situations that felt uncomfortable. At one point, her father came over, standing just a bit too close, his expression carefully neutral. He cleared his throat, glancing between Emma and me. "So, how have things been with, everything?" It was an awkward question, his attempt at small talk feeling stilted and out of place. But I saw it for what it was, his version of an olive branch. A tentative step toward acceptance, even if he couldn't fully articulate it. I nodded, keeping my tone light but respectful. "Things have been good, busy, but we're making it work," Emma added. "Our daughter's been really happy, and that's what matters to us." He nodded slowly, his face unreadable, but he didn't press further. Instead, he gave a brief nod and walked away, as though he'd fulfilled some unspoken obligation to check in. It wasn't exactly a breakthrough, but it was a start, a small acknowledgement of our family's presence on our own terms. The day passed without incident, and as we prepared to leave, Emma's mother approached us, her expression thoughtful. She pulled Emma into a tight hug, then looked at me, hesitating before finally speaking. "I know this has been hard on you both, especially you," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "We may not fully understand, but we're trying." I could see Emma's relief as she hugged her mother back, and even though the words didn't completely erase the hurt of the past, they felt like the start of something better. As we left, I felt a cautious sense of optimism, a belief that with time and patience, we could create a healthier environment for our family. Over the next few months, we continued to practice those boundaries, showing up when it felt right, declining invitations when we needed space, and keeping communication open and respectful. There were difficult moments, of course, occasions when her father's barely concealed disapproval slipped through, or when subtle comments reminded us that complete change might never come. But Emma and I held firm, backing each other up and making decisions as a team. Her family seemed to gradually adjust to the new normal. There were fewer confrontations, fewer tense silences, and, with each gathering, I felt a bit more at ease, as though I no longer had to shrink myself to fit into their expectations. Our daughter, too, seemed happier, her interactions with her grandparents and cousins more natural now that the underlying tension was easing. Emma and I even found ourselves spending more time with my family, visiting my parents and letting our daughter experience a side of her heritage that was embraced fully, without reservation. The joy on her face during those visits reminded me that our efforts were worth it. That by protecting our boundaries, we were giving her a sense of identity and pride that would stay with her as she grew. But perhaps the most significant change was in my relationship with Emma. Through all of this, she had become my strongest ally, standing by me even when it meant challenging her own family. We'd grown closer, more united, and I could see her strength and resilience in every difficult conversation, every decision we made to protect our family's happiness. One evening, as we sat on the couch after a quiet family dinner, Emma turned to me, a soft smile on her face. "Thank you for pushing us to do this," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. I didn't realize how much we needed these boundaries until now. I feel like we're finally free to be ourselves. I reached for her hand, feeling the warmth of her words settle in my heart. Thank you for standing by me. I know it hasn't been easy, but I feel like we're stronger because of it. She nodded, leaning into me as we sat together in the quiet comfort of our home. Our daughter playing in the next room, her laughter filling the space with a joy I knew we'd worked hard to protect. In that moment, I realized that we'd succeeded in creating the family we wanted, one built on love, respect, and resilience. The boundaries we'd set had become more than just rules, they were a foundation that allowed us to grow, to find peace, and to create a life where we could all be our true selves. And as I held Emma close, I knew that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, stronger than ever. As the weeks turned into months, the boundaries Emma and I had set with her family became woven into the fabric of our lives. What had once felt like a struggle now felt more natural. The clarity of our intentions helping everyone understand where we stood. There were still moments of tension, of course, and times when old habits reared their heads. But Emma's parents had made efforts to respect our wishes, keeping our family interactions more peaceful and even enjoyable. It was a crisp fall afternoon when we gathered at Emma's parents' house for Thanksgiving. I could feel the familiar apprehension creeping up as we pulled into the driveway. But this time, it was tempered by a sense of calm. Emma's hand rested on mine, and she gave me a reassuring smile. "We've got this," she said softly, her eyes full of confidence. Inside, her family had gone all out, the house filled with the warm scents of roasted turkey and freshly baked pies. Her mother welcomed us at the door, pulling our daughter into a big hug. "It's so good to see you all," she said warmly, glancing at me with a genuine smile. As we moved into the living room, I noticed her father watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read. For a moment, I felt the tension tighten in my chest, but he simply nodded in acknowledgement, a subtle gesture that felt like progress in its own right. Dinner was a surprisingly pleasant affair. Conversation flowed easily, with Emma's family genuinely engaging with us, asking about my work, showing interest in our daughter's hobbies, and keeping the atmosphere light and welcoming. I noticed that Emma's parents were making an effort, particularly her mother, who asked about our daughter's recent swimming lessons and listened with genuine interest as our daughter recounted every detail. The biggest change, though, was in Emma. I could see how the boundaries we'd set had empowered her, how her confidence in our family had grown. She no longer sat tense, ready to deflect or smooth over uncomfortable moments. Instead, she laughed freely, sharing stories about our lives, painting a picture of our family with pride. It was clear to everyone in the room that we were a team, a united family with love and respect at its core. At one point, Emma's father leaned over to me, his voice low and hesitant. "I just wanted to say, thank you for being here," he said, glancing away before meeting my gaze. "I know things have been difficult. I'm still trying to understand everything, but I'm glad you're part of this family." His words caught me off guard, a quiet admission that felt like a genuine attempt to bridge the gap between us. I nodded, choosing my words carefully. "Thank you. I know it's been an adjustment for everyone, but I think we're moving in the right direction." He gave a small nod, his face softening as he turned back to his plate. It wasn't a grand apology or a complete turnaround, but it was a start, an acknowledgement that went a long way toward healing the wounds of the past. After dinner, as everyone moved into the living room to relax, Emma and I sat back, watching our daughter play with her cousins. She looked completely at ease, laughing and running around without a care in the world. And it struck me just how far we'd come. This was the environment we'd wanted for her, one where she felt fully accepted, where she could be herself without fear of judgment or exclusion. Emma's mother joined us, sitting down with a soft sigh. She watched the children play, a gentle smile on her face. "Your daughter is so spirited," she said, her voice filled with affection. "She reminds me of Emma at that age, full of life and curiosity." I smiled, glancing at Emma, who returned the look with a quiet pride. "She's definitely got Emma's energy," I agreed, feeling a surge of warmth at the compliment. Her mother turned to me, her expression thoughtful. "I know we've had our differences, and I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but I just want you to know that I appreciate everything you've done for our family. You're a wonderful father and husband, and we're lucky to have you." The sincerity in her words took me by surprise. and I felt a lump form in my throat. For so long, I'd felt like an outsider. Like I had to fight for every ounce of acceptance. But here she was, acknowledging me, validating my place in this family. I nodded, my voice thick with emotion. Thank you. That means a lot. As the evening wound down, Emma and I prepared to leave. Saying our goodbyes, her family hugged us warmly. Their smiles genuine, their farewells heartfelt. As we walked to the car, hand in hand, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. A reassurance that we were finally finding our place in this family on our own terms. Driving home that night, I looked back at our daughter, who had fallen asleep in the backseat. Her face relaxed, a small smile on her lips. I glanced at Emma, who was watching her with a look of quiet contentment, and I reached for her hand, feeling a surge of gratitude for everything we'd built together. Do you feel it? She asked softly, her eyes meeting mine. I nodded, my heart full. Yeah, I think we've finally found our balance. She squeezed my hand, a tear slipping down her cheek. And I knew it was a tear of relief, of joy, of the hard-won happiness we'd fought for. We'd set boundaries, faced the difficult conversations, and navigated the challenges together. And now, finally, we'd carved out a space of acceptance, of love and respect. Not only for ourselves but for our daughter. In that moment, I knew that no matter what lay ahead, we were stronger than ever. Our family bound by a resilience that would carry us through any storm. And as we drove home, the night unfolding around us, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for Emma, for our daughter, and for the future we'd fought to create together. In the months that followed Thanksgiving, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. It was amazing how much had changed in just a few short months. And how something as simple and as difficult as setting boundaries had transformed our family. For the first time, I felt like Emma and I were living on equal terms with her family. With a newfound respect that permeated every interaction, the holidays arrived, and with them came gatherings, visits, and the usual chaos of family life. This time, though, there was a peace I hadn't felt before. I noticed Emma's parents treating our daughter with a warmth and openness I hadn't seen in years past. They listened to her stories, encouraged her interests, and even began learning a few words from my family's language to make her feel more connected to her heritage. Watching their efforts, no matter how small, filled me with hope that this wasn't just a temporary change but a genuine shift. One evening, after a particularly warm family dinner at her parents' house, Emma and I took a quiet walk together. The crisp winter air biting but refreshing. We walked hand in hand, reflecting on the past year and everything we'd been through. I still can't believe how far we've come, she said softly, her voice laced with wonder. A few months ago, I didn't know if things would ever feel right. But now, it's like we're finally part of the family. All three of us. I nodded, a deep sense of gratitude welling up within me. It took a lot to get here. But I'm so glad we did. I feel like we've finally carved out a place where we belong. And that's worth everything. Emma's eyes sparkled, and she squeezed my hand. I'm so proud of us. And of you. You pushed me to face things I didn't want to see. And I know it couldn't have been easy. I just want you to know that I see everything you did for us. For our daughter. For me. Her words hit me deeply. A validation of everything I'd held on to through the difficult moments. Thank you, Emma. I couldn't have done it without you by my side. And I think this is just the beginning. We're creating something new here. Something better than what either of us had before. As we walked back, the quiet streets around us illuminated by soft lights, I thought about the future. We were stronger now, united in a way I'd always dreamed of but never thought would be possible. I knew we'd face more challenges. That family dynamics would continue to shift. But now, we had the tools to handle whatever came our way. And the change wasn't just in our relationship with Emma's family. It had altered the way we saw ourselves as parents, as partners, and as individuals. The love we had for our daughter was our anchor. But now, it was joined by a profound respect for each other. A respect that had been earned through hard choices and moments of vulnerability. When we returned home that night, our daughter was asleep in the backseat, her face peaceful. I carried her inside, laying her gently in her bed. And Emma joined me, watching her with a soft smile. She's lucky to have you as a dad, Emma whispered, slipping her arm around my waist. And I'm lucky to have you, too. The words resonated, a reminder of everything we'd built together. I leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to our daughter's forehead, then turned to Emma, pulling her close. We're all lucky, I think, because we have each other. The months rolled on, and with each passing day, our family grew stronger, our bond deepening. The respect we'd fought for continued to ripple outwards, affecting our extended family and strengthening our friendships. We found ourselves spending more time with my family, giving our daughter the chance to connect with her roots on both sides. And watching her embrace her heritage filled me with a pride that words couldn't capture. As winter melted into spring, I realized that I no longer carried the weight of the past on my shoulders. The resentment and pain that had once haunted me had faded, replaced by a profound sense of peace. Emma and I were creating the family we wanted, one filled with love, acceptance, and respect, a legacy I knew would stay with our daughter as she grew. One sunny afternoon, as we watched her run through the garden, her laughter filling the air, Emma looked at me, her eyes shining with joy. "We did it," she said simply, her voice filled with awe. "We created this life, and I wouldn't change a thing." I smiled, feeling the truth of her words settle deep in my soul. Neither would I. In that moment, I knew that we had built something lasting, something unbreakable, a family forged through love, respect, and the strength to stand up for what mattered. Whatever the future held, I was ready to face it, knowing that together, we could overcome anything. Our journey hadn't been easy, but looking at Emma and our daughter, I knew it had been worth every step. A year passed since that difficult season in our lives, and as time unfolded, the lessons we'd learned became woven into the fabric of our family. Life had resumed its steady rhythm, and the tension that once surrounded every family gathering now felt like a distant memory. With our boundaries in place, we'd found a way to protect our peace without burning bridges, letting us all simply enjoy being together. One breezy autumn afternoon, Emma, our daughter, and I were at the local park. As our daughter chased leaves and twirled in the golden sunlight, her laughter filling the air, Emma nestled closer to me on the bench. Her hands slipped into mine, and she leaned her head against my shoulder. Both of us watching our little girl with pride. I could feel the weight of our shared journey in that moment, the strength, the resilience, the deep, abiding love that had carried us through so much. Later that day, we had dinner with Emma's parents at their home. It was a quiet, relaxed evening, without the tension of unspoken judgments or awkward silences. Her father surprised me by striking up a conversation about one of my favorite books, something he'd never taken an interest in before. He even asked me a few questions about our daughter's school projects. Seeming genuinely interested, it was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was a sign of change, a small olive branch that meant more than he probably realized. As we were leaving, Emma's mother pulled me aside. "Thank you for everything you do for Emma and our granddaughter," she said quietly. Her eyes held a sincerity that made me feel like, for the first time, she truly saw me, not as an outsider but as someone worthy of being part of the family. "You've made her so happy. And that's what we always wanted for her." I nodded, giving her a small smile. "Thank you. We're building something special together. And I'm grateful you're part of it." On the drive home, with Emma and our daughter chatting animatedly in the backseat about the upcoming Halloween parade, I felt a surge of gratitude. We'd overcome so much. And now, in the quiet spaces of our lives, there was a peace that I hadn't dared to imagine before. I knew that no family was perfect, but we'd created a life that felt real and whole, grounded in love and respect. That night, as Emma and I tucked our daughter into bed, she looked up at us, a sleepy smile on her face. "I'm glad we're a family," she murmured, her voice soft and full of contentment. Emma and I exchanged a glance, and I felt her hand slip into mine as we both leaned down to kiss our daughter goodnight. "Me too, sweetheart," I whispered, my heart swelling with love. "Me too." As I closed her door and we turned out the light, I realized that the journey we'd traveled had led us exactly where we needed to be, not just as individuals but as a family. We had faced our challenges head-on, grown stronger, and found a way to create a life filled with joy, acceptance, and unbreakable bonds. And as Emma and I sat together in the quiet of our living room that night, I knew that whatever the future held, we were ready, because we had each other. And that, in the end, was everything.